You're on.
Good evening. This is the regular meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission, Thursday, March 13th, 2014, at Brisbane City Hall. Roll call.
Commissioner Doe,
Present.
Commissioner Munir,
Here.
Commissioner Cunningham,
Present.
Chair Parker,
Here.
and know for record that Commissioner Reinhardt is absent.
Now we move to adoption of the agenda, item C. Anyone want to?
I move to adopt the agenda.
Thank you. A second?
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Item D, consent calendar. Approval of draft action minutes. The first one is January 23rd, 2014, regular meeting. Any changes?
I have no changes.
No changes.
Changes.
Would anyone like to approve it?
Make a motion to approve the draft action minutes of January 13, 2014 regular meeting.
I second.
All in favor?
Right.
Now, approval of the February 27th, 2014 regular meeting. Any changes?
No changes.
No changes.
I move that we adopt the draft action minutes of February 27, 2014 regular meeting.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item E, oral communications. If anyone would like to come up and speak, would you two like to come up? No? All right, at this point, we close the oral communications and move on to the written communications. And I think there's something from the 2000 Sierra Point Parkway Telecommunications Administration permit. And
Through the chair, that's just an informational item that you're copied on. It's a change out of some antennas on the top of that building. Same location, same height, same appearance overall.
thank you. All right,
What are these?
I don't know. These have to do with the meeting tonight, correct?
I don't know. There's no...
Yeah. Yes, these have to do with the meeting tonight.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to item,
There's one more item that,
but that's for tonight's meeting, isn't it?
no, this is the procedures, memorandum for the planning commission procedures.
Okay, so we have a memorandum for the Planning Commission to select officer staff. And is there any date that we will do that? Is it tonight?
That is on your agenda for the end of the meeting tonight. So this is would be a guide. It's essentially a guide in terms of what the duties of the chair are and those sorts of things. Also an attendance summary for the last year.
Great, thank you. All right, moving on to item G, study session. 2015 to 2023 Housing Element Update Study Session Number 2, Chapter 2, Community Characteristics and Housing Needs. That?
The subject of this study session is Chapter 2, Community Characteristics and Housing Needs, which addresses the state requirement for a housing needs assessment in the housing element. The draft before you has been updated to include currently available data regarding population, employment, housing stock, and special housing needs, including the new state requirement that the housing needs of the developmentally disabled be addressed. In terms of population, a number of trends are apparent. Although Brisbane's population has increased, average household size has remained steady, while both single-parent households and large households have increased in number. The median age has continued to increase, but the changing age distribution indicates a new wave of residents from 20 to 34 years old rising, which may influence future housing needs and preferences as significantly as the growing population of seniors. Seniors make up the largest percentage of the population with special needs. Almost 10% of Brisbane's population has a disability, but the majority of them are between 18 and 64 years old. The most common disabilities were ambulatory and difficulty living independently. There were 22 persons in Brisbane in 2013 with developmental disabilities, almost a quarter of whom were in independent or supportive living settings. While Brisbane's housing stock has continued to grow, particularly with the new single-family residences at the Ridge, the proportion of owner-occupied units has decreased. As of last year, the vacancy rate exceeded 5%. Single-family home sales prices have rebounded, but condominium sale prices have yet to fully recover. Median sales prices for single-family homes and condominiums are only affordable to above moderate income households. About half of current homeowners are paying more than 30% of their income on housing, while Brisbane's median monthly rents may be affordable to some existing tenants. Over half are overpaying, with the highest proportion being among those making the least income. Average advertised rents for smaller vacant units may be affordable to low and moderate income households, but larger households will have difficulty finding suitably sized, affordable units to rent. ABAG Projections 2013 were just released, and that's one of the 2 pages you have before you. After the agenda report went out, they project that Brisbane's population will grow to 4,500 by 2020, a 5.1 increase over the decade, which is much less than ABAG had predicted in 2009. The takeaway from all of this data is that affordable housing is clearly still needed in Brisbane. The growing younger and older generations may actually find multifamily housing to be more desirable if it is designed and located to suit their needs. In particular, the more accessible new housing is designed to be, the better it will be able to serve those with special needs. That concludes the presentation. If there are any questions you have, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Oh, and the second table that was provided to you tonight is actually the color bar graph is the same data that was in table 7 as a chart. And it's just a kind of an interesting way to look at how the age distribution has changed. Generally, decade by decade, the most recent information we have is for 2012. And you can kind of track age cohorts as they grow older in 10-year increments, to see how certain groups are either increasing or decreasing. What I see in this is that we see a spike in the green bar populations between 2010 and 2012, and that's the 15 to 24-year-olds. By the end of the decade, that group will be up in their mid-30s. And you also can see a slight bump in the 45 to 50-year-olds, and by the end of the decade, of course, they're going to be in their 60s, many of them. So those are the 2 kind of age populations that we might want to keep in mind when we look to what kind of new housing might be appropriate under the term of the housing element that we're working on updating now. Any questions?
So year 2000, there were more babies born, or what? It says 0 to 4 all the way spiked to 800.
That's what the data shows.
So now we are less babies are born now in 2010, 12. It's decreasing, right?
Oh,
Well, by
2010 to
about
2012.
200, so we had about,
so what does this say to you, Tim? I mean, this is great. This is the first time I've set my eyes on this graph. It's interesting first blush, 30-second read, but you've looked at this. So what does this say to you?
A lot of the data that we referred to in this chapter comes from different sources with different degrees of reliability. Here, the 2010 data is from the U.S. Census, which was purportedly a 100% count of everyone in Brisbane. The 2010 data is based on samples of surveys that the Census Bureau conducts over a 5-year period So they try to be as accurate as they can, but with a small population like Brisbane, the margin of error can be relatively large. So it's hard to rely upon this data to make any kind of hard and true statements. But what I see is that younger people in their 20s to 30s are increasing as their proportion of the population of Brisbane, as are the seniors. You're going to see more of that bulge in the middle is going to be aging. And those two populations most likely would be more inclined to look for housing that is in an apartment building or condominium, as opposed to a more established family that was looking for a single family detached home. Particularly with the affordability of detached single family homes in Brisbane being so out of reach for most people, the data really does support the direction that our RENA numbers are headed, where we should be looking towards providing more housing at that affordable end of the spectrum. By the same token, when you look at ABAG's projections 2013, they have dialed back significantly from what they had projected in 2009. So the RENA numbers that we had for the 2007-2014 housing element were in multiples of 100, whereas the RENA numbers we have for this upcoming planning period for the housing element are much less. We never quite achieved all of the goals that we had set for ourselves in the current housing element, so we're going to have to address that when we get to those chapters of the housing element as part of this update. But in the long term, I think ABAG recognizes that growth is not as robust as they had thought before the economic crash.
So, given that, and the question of in-law units, how does that fit into this equation?
From the statistics that we've looked at, Brisbane has a large potential for secondary dwelling units that has not been utilized. There may be a number of reasons for that, and we've discussed some of those in the current housing element. I think we're going to look at some additional alternatives to try to further take advantage of that. Secondary dwelling units have a large number of benefits, not only to those people who would be living in them and presumably be paying less than the highest rents that you would get for a condominium or an apartment building, a new apartment building. And at the same time, presumably the owner who is residing in the rest of the unit is going to have a means of some additional income to make their own mortgage payments, if they have any, more affordable. So there are benefits that work both ways. Secondary dwelling units, according to HIP, which is one of the county's services to find essentially roommates for people, particularly with special needs, they've identified secondary dwelling units as a prime means of, for example, seniors finding someone to share their home with them, and in some cases the developmentally disabled who are looking for a kind of a supportive housing arrangement. So hopefully we're going to try to make the case to HCD that we've got additional ideas to encourage people to take advantage of the potential for secondary dwelling units, and we're also going to try to convince HCD that those units, that potential, should be considered as addressing some of our lower income affordability. The RENA numbers.
Okay. So so far, how has our community perceived this or accepted or not relative to parking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
That's a good question, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I get it. I understand it. But we are a very unique community that has unique questions and answers for many, many things. And, I mean, we start putting secondary dwelling units all over town in some of the smaller homes or the bigger homes or a mix of both. And that whole parking thing becomes exacerbated unless we deal with that, right? And I'm just wondering, what is the community blowback so far on that?
Well, we addressed the parking standards for secondary dwelling units in the parking ordinance that you had recommended be adopted by the city council, and they're still considering at the subcommittee level. The approach we took there was that we were trying to encourage smaller units by reducing the parking requirement for them. Our standard requirement currently is 2 parking spaces for a secondary dwelling unit, regardless of the size or number of bedrooms. And that's pretty extreme compared to what most jurisdictions do. I think another thing that we might want to try to think of ways to encourage are secondary dwelling units that are created by converting a portion of an existing dwelling as opposed to expanding an existing dwelling. So that way you're essentially not increasing the floor area, you're not necessarily increasing the number of bedrooms, and potentially the parking demand wouldn't increase as much as it would if you just added on a brand new unit onto an existing house. And there may be approaches that we can discuss to try to do that.
Why did we come up with 2 parking spaces for, anyway, how'd that happen?
I believe that goes back to when the state first allowed secondary
Sure.
dwelling units, and 2 spaces was
Oh.
the standard requirement, and
Okay.
we've just never adjusted it.
Does anybody think that's unreasonable or reasonable or?
Well, part of the reason why we've had so few secondary dwelling units approved is because obviously people can't meet the parking requirements.
But do we have the parking? Even though if
Right.
we reduce it, there is no place to park, so,
Well, if there's no place to park, then you're not going to get your permit,
yeah.
and you're
so
not going to be able to
that's
build
the-
one.
That's why we, all along, we've been talking about providing a parking space by the city. And there were some plans to put some kind of a parking structure in the downtown, which never went through. And if you have that in the plan, that city is committed to do that, then you might be able to cash on this particular part, secondary dwelling. Without that, no matter if you drop it as much as you want, there is no parking space. So we can play with the numbers, but real situation is there is none.
I think that might be a bit of a generalization, and I'm sure there are instances where it's feasible to provide the parking required.
There might be some places, but no, many places there is no place. And we heard complaints over and over and over
Oh,
again.
yeah.
Well, and two, keep in mind that currently you have to have a 5,000 square foot site to even qualify to request a secondary dwelling unit. So many of the building sites in central Brisbane are the 25-foot wide lots, which wouldn't necessarily qualify to apply, let alone be able to meet the parking requirement for 2 units. But as you might recall, there's actually a table in the current housing element that we'll be updating that identifies all of the properties that theoretically could meet that 5,000 square foot standard. So, you can take a look at those and kind of in your own mind picture,
How many are those? I mean,
Ken, do you recall
That number?
potential secondary dwelling units? It was like 200 or something? Yeah.
it's not in this table, right?
You say 200?
This is testing my memory. I'm thinking more like 400, but I'm not positive on that. This was from the last cycle. I haven't looked at the numbers recently to refresh my memory. But we'll bring that forward to you, I think it's the end of next month,
Correct.
Those are potential or those we have?
Potential.
potentially.
Well, the one we have hardly more than a dozen.
Yeah, that's
Legal.
what I was thinking.
This is something else to keep in mind, that there are grandfathered second units. I have no idea how many of those there are that we have legalized because they predated the adoption of the city's own zoning ordinance.
Uh-huh.
And so, of course, we're not going to get any credit for
Oh.
those.
Because they exist.
They already
Right.
exist. And that's really, well, HCD has an interesting take on the whole question of how much credit a city can claim for its potential for secondary dwelling units, because you have to demonstrate a track record of having approved them in order to claim any future potential for development.
I just, a question is, how many in the last 4 or 5 years secondary units have been approved?
I believe 2.
Yeah, I know of one. That was our council member, Richardson.
Just this year, we approved one just
So that's,
fairly recently, actually just a couple
so
months
2
ago.
in the last 5
And
years?
we have one in process right now, so
Huh.
probably 1 to 2 a year.
And I think, once again, that's been a reflection of the economy having tanked. Because prior to that, we had a pretty good stretch there in the early 2000s. But still, the percentage are nothing approaching what the potential goes.
So what I'm hearing is that we're stepping back from the idea of rezoning a certain part of Crocker Park, or,
I say that at all.
oh, all right.
No, in fact, the numbers that you've received tonight are leading in that direction.
Leading in what direction?
In the direction that we are going to need to find sites that can accommodate higher density multifamily development.
Mhm.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead. So, if we were to contemplate more secondary dwelling units in Old Town Brisbane, and given that the biggest headache that I think I've had in the last 4 years on this planning commission was parking in that short order, can we initiate or can we contemplate the idea that has been brought up, and I know it's been brought up because I know before I was on the planning commission, I brought it up several times, some kind of, and I think that's what Commissioner Manier was talking about as well, some off-site parking availability, like a, I think I brought it up, and I think other people brought it up, like under the bridge or somewhere we've got additional parking in town that might relieve some of the current congestion, which I think is already critical. And, anytime we add more units in our urban development here, we not really have much of a chance to add much parking. Can we think about that some more?
Certainly.
I mean, because I that just makes sense to me. I mean, even if it's a half-mile walk, I mean, there's this whole thing coming up with not the smart cars, what is it, the
Zip cars.
zip cars and all this other stuff. I mean, there might be things that
I think there was one time a plan to put the parking structure in the downtown, right next to that, forgot the name of the bar,
the Brisbane Inn.
Brisbane, right across.
But is that a
from-
good place to put parking, or is that a better place for something else?
No, I'm just mentioning that that will be a more central location for the
Right.
people, rather than all the way to the bridge, under the bridge, because the thing is, there will be a lot of people who will have a difficult time to walk from there to their house. If they're
Yeah, no, it was
late.
just a thought process,
Yeah.
that's all.
But that was there in works at one time, and I really don't know what happened to it. And we never heard, I think it was dropped again.
Well, that's private property, correct?
If the city was going to purchase that, that was my understanding. I don't know what happened.
It may have been that the impetus was originally because we allowed commercial development downtown to buy into a parking assessment district if one were ever formed, and that's where the interest was generated, and then the demand for commercial development downtown just kind of withered, and there was no more interest in trying to provide parking.
Well, wasn't that back then because of if you wanted to develop any of those properties on visitation, that you would have to supply X amount of parking, and that was, okay, unless we excavate underneath the building, we can't do that. So, I mean, where are we with that idea? I mean,
Well,
we kind of constrained ourselves on that, right?
that was the original impetus, but then what we did was we amended the zoning ordinance to allow ground floor retail uses, storefront uses, without having to provide the parking.
Okay.
I see a problem that as the seniors, people are retiring and they're looking at their funds, that we are not able to provide enough low-cost housing for seniors. So they are with really no choice but to leave to see if they can find something, in another area, such as a mobile home for seniors or something they can afford. And my concern is that we really don't have enough apartment buildings that are affordable. I did attend a meeting of the city council where there was a group, and I don't remember what name it was, that was talking about building affordable apartment units in different areas of the Bay Area. And do you know if there's been any more interest from that group towards Brisbane?
Are you talking about the Brisbane Village?
No.
Okay.
There's ongoing conversation with, I think it's probably MidPenn is
Yeah.
the organization.
Right.
And there's always interest in sites and properties that are either underutilized or mismanaged, for lack of a better word. And I haven't heard of anything that's really coming to fruition, but they certainly stay in contact with the city and the city manager and look for opportunity sites. So that's we have a regular, a working relationship with them. But again, to find the right circumstances is not always the easiest thing. But they have a continued interest in working with Brisbane and in Brisbane, and we'll explore opportunities with them as they arise.
Has the city considered rent control as something to factor in when we're talking about affordable housing?
The difficulty with rent control is that it's regulated by the state. And essentially, you're not allowed to apply rent control to units constructed after a certain date, which is way in the past. I don't recall the specifics. But we've discussed rent control in previous versions of the housing element, basically acknowledging that it would not work in Brisbane.
Now, the mobile home parks, are they included in this calculation?
Yes, mobile home parks are included.
So there are some spaces along the Bay Shore. Can be encouraged to have some more mobile home park there.
We'd have to
One of the things that I assume we will be discussing is how you want to deal with Southwest Bay Shore. The previous housing element, had talked about significant changes in the zoning. I don't know that we're going to want to continue that route. We may be looking for other opportunities. But that still leaves the area to consider for example, expanding the mobile home park or other potential.
So that
That's
can
interesting.
bring a lot of units in one small area.
And they're definitely affordable.
Yeah.
They are affordable. I had the feeling that we were writing into the regulations no more mobile home parks. No? No.
Actually, according to G.1.34, housing type table 21, there's been a pretty steady increase, right? Except in 2000 where it went to 43, but it was 55, 63, 43, and then 66.
The mobile home park out there has room for about 66.
So it's reached its maximum capacity then.
It's full now as far as I know, yes.
There's something else that I want to throw into this this mix. The people who are involved with the Brisbane Village, has that come to the planning department yet? Do you have any knowledge of that yet?
Can you be more specific about what?
Okay, so there is a group within Brisbane. Well, there is a group. I think it's within California called Villages, a village community situation, and there are several people who are running that here in Brisbane. And as of 2014, the village community meeting. February 20th, 6:30, they'll be having a meeting in City Hall Community Room relative to the Brisbane Village Working Group, which will then report back to the community what they've learned over the past several months about a village. And if you look up villages, the whole concept behind villages, this is interesting that you guys don't know about it, is that this whole process is it's very well recognized throughout the entire state and within communities. I think the Sausalito Village, if you look that up, is probably a prime example where there are groups that work on people aging in place and how that looks. I just think that whole
okay.
thing
I was getting confused
ties
about it.
into us looking at secondary dwelling units and what that looks like, and maybe there is an elderly person or couple in town that has a 3 or 4 bedroom home that may want to share that home with other people, etc. But that is really well into the works right now. I don't want to put people's names out publicly because they haven't agreed that that would be the case, but they've been meeting with city staff. So I know this is, well down the road, and there's been a lot of meetings about it. And the Sausalito Village, if you look it up, is doing extremely well, an extremely good job at this. So maybe this is time to kind of pull that in, or at least ask the city council, is it appropriate to pull that into the conversation around this? Because they do an excellent job, and the villages that are already in place in California are doing really, really well. Just a thought.
Is there a website you can go and find out about that?
I will speak to the people who run this and make sure that I get that to you, John, so
I
that can...
already found it's, I'll bookmark it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, and the meetings that I have attended in the early part of this discussion, is just as a resident, it's amazing what can actually be done. They're doing a really great job.
Getting back to the idea of more zoning for mobile homes on Bayshore, is there any zoning that we have at this point that would allow it?
Yes.
Another
Yeah.
mobile home there is?
Yeah,
Yes, there
that's one of the conditional uses in the SCR01 district.
SCR01.
Yeah.
And we're not
Correct.
changing the districts, so, at this point, so.
What we had discussed doing in the previous housing element was to actually create a zoning district specifically for the mobile home park, to protect it from being converted to other
Correct.
uses.
Correct. But at that point, I didn't see that we were talking about adding a second one.
No,
Or expanding.
yeah, I don't recall that having been brought up, but certainly if property owners were interested in it, there are ways that we could see if we could make it easier.
Well, we would have to find out if Brisbane is interested, period. But,
There was a little potential for Charles Eng's property on Bay Shore. That will be developed in near future, or what, do you know?
My understanding is that the property was on the market and there has been a new buyer.
I don't know if there's a new buyer at this point, but there's been definitely quite a bit of interest in that property, so we've been getting inquiries.
But the new buyers has to go through the same process again to apply, or is it?
It's the court.
No, that site is entitled already as it is. If they wanted to change the design, then it would be back to the planning commission again. But the design as it stands is entitled.
So it's on sale right now, I put out.
I have no more
I
comments.
was very interested how these numbers, how people got the numbers for these units. I can't imagine how it was done. You know, how many people are homeless, how many people have disabilities, how many people are in what income group, and
Apparently, they send out very detailed surveys to collect some of this information. And they do a statistical analysis to derive from the samples what would be expected for the entire population. The homeless counts, my understanding, were based upon surveys done by individuals for the county on particular nights specifically, where they go out and look to see if they can find any homeless people. So there are different ways to collect the information, and how that information, how reliable it is, depends on the methodology that they've used to collect it.
well, this is very interesting.
So what will be the next step after this?
The next chapter that we will be reviewing is chapter 5, Meeting Housing Needs, which is kind of an overview of all the various potential programs that the city could pursue to address the availability, affordability, and quality of housing in Brisbane. And then with that, we will probably also update Chapter 4, Housing Constraints, which identifies the governmental and non-governmental constraints in the provision of housing. And that's the one where we probably most get into the secondary dwelling unit issues.
What was the rationale for the priority? The way you prioritize the study sessions? I'm just trying to get a framework.
We started with chapter 2 because this provides you with the kind of database to make these decisions. You've got all the statistics that we have available. The next step I thought would make the most sense would be to take a look at essentially a laundry list of all of the potential programs that we've considered in the past and that other housing advocates have promoted. And then the analysis of governmental and non-governmental constraints is a little more focused. And so we might take a look at the various possible programs and then find those and fine-tune them to address the particular problems we have in Brisbane. So that would be the constraints analysis. Following that, I am assuming that we will go to chapter 1, which the main component of that chapter is an analysis of how effective the previous housing element, the one we have currently, 2007-2014, how effective it has been, and if there are any lessons we can learn from it to improve upon. And then following that, we will then start doing the number crunching in the sites analysis. And with that, we'll start looking at potential for rezoning. And then we'll end up with the final chapter of the housing element, which is the list of adopted policies and programs. And all of these, we're going to be going to the current housing elements chapters and updating those. We're not going to try to reinvent the wheel.
So what's the due date for all that stuff?
The target that we're at is that we're going to try to get the Planning Commission in a position where you can recommend a draft to the City Council before the summer break. So then the City Council can take it up when they come back from their
So
break.
like end of June, I guess.
That's what we're shooting for.
Okay. So we don't have very much time left.
No, we don't.
So would it be advisable for us to bring previous chapters, start from study sessions, or would that be information be incorporated in subsequent study sessions? So i.e., if you need data from this, should we be bringing this packet as opposed to?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
No more questions. Thank you.
So we're closing the study session at this point. Next, items initiated by staff.
I don't have anything tonight.
What's the status of the EIR?
The consultants are working on preparing the responses to comments, and their tentative schedule they're looking at a June delivery of an administrative draft, so, I would say it's mid to late summer before anything will be published. We'll keep you apprised if that date gets refined. The council will at some point be visiting the whole idea of process for the final EIR, and I'm not sure when they're going to take that up, but at that point, be revisiting that with the Planning Commission as well, either before or after that happens.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for staff?
I have none.
All right. Moving on to items initiated by the commission. Any subcommittee updates?
Nothing.
All right.
I want to make one comment regarding the requirement for the community value for the views that for related to 8 Thomas. And I was wondering that why is it limited to Brisbane Acres only? Because when it comes to the visual impact, impairing the ridge line, then it should be for all the other homes that are on the hillside along the Humboldt as well as the Kings Road. So why do we have that requirement for Brisbane Acres only? Because at some point we're planning to, I understand that council wants to revisit that. So at that point, I'd like the staff to bring this up because I may or may not attend that meeting. But I think it's a question that needs to be addressed as to why we're segregating only the Brisbane Acres and making them to do all this analysis, where there is just as much potential for the other homes that are not part of the Brisbane Acres. So the community value only extends to the Brisbane Acres. We don't care. The other homes may block the ridgeline view. That's the question I have. And no more questions or suggestions.
Okay. At this point, I think we are moving on to the selection of planning commission officers.
We have one commissioner is absent, but we can still go ahead and select it, right? Doesn't have to be a full commission, or doesn't have to be? Okay. If you give me the chance to go ahead, may I?
Certainly.
Okay, I'd like to nominate Karen Cunningham as our next planning commission chair.
And I would like to nominate Commissioner Bunn as the vice
Chair, yeah.
chair.
So should we take the vote on that?
What do we do?
All in
You might want to
favor?
go individually, not as a slate, so open it and close the nominations for the chairperson and then
Okay.
vote and then do that for vice chair, I'd recommend.
Okay, so I made the motion to elect Ms. Karen Cunningham as the next chair for the planning commission. Somebody wants to second that?
I will second it.
Okay. So now you have to take the vote.
All in favor?
Aye. So welcome aboard. Okay.
Well, thank you.
Chairperson. So now, Carolyn, you're going to go ahead with the vice chair nomination?
Yes, I am nominating Commissioner Doe as the vice chair, and
Second that. I'll second that.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I hope you guys know what you're getting into.
We have you, right?
I think we got a pretty
And
good idea
Caroline,
at
right?
this point, right?
Yeah. You're staying on board.
I don't know. After last council meeting, I'm rethinking what to do about this planning
I think you
commission.
should stay here.
I will stay.
Thanks.
If the chairperson insists, I will stay.
Should we
I'll
exchange
respect,
seats
I
at this point?
respect her opinion.
Oh. Oh, is that what we do?
I don't know.
So I guess you have to change this seat right now, or what? In the past, we used to,
like. Wait till the next.
that you
Did
will
you want to
be
wait until the
announcing now
next
the.
meeting, or
next
did you
meetings.
want to?
It's all cool.
So
All
adjourn.
good with me. I've got my little bag here. I'm all good to go.
So
All right.
the last item is you take over now.
I do?
Yeah.
You do what?
Last item, the adjournment.
Oh, I do. So I adjourn now?
Yeah.
Have the gavel. Whoa, scary stuff.
We can exchange seats if you want.
No, So I make a motion to adjourn to the regular meeting of March 27th, 2014 at 7:30 PM.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I do have one last, it's not really a business item, but just a reminder, is that the League of Cities meeting is next week, right? 2 weeks out, the March 25th and 26th. Anyway, yeah, the dates,
It's 2 weeks.
2 weeks away. So before we convene again, I think we'll be in the middle of, all the members who are attending will be in the throes of that. And I think there's actually meeting scheduled that day of our planning commission meeting. So it'll be a long day for everybody.
Yeah, I have finished my ethics committee training already online, and it's pretty interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.